be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the fourth part of, What If Danny Phantom Enters Harry Potter? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of RusEmp on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The next lesson of Dada was going splendidly. Students were showing an admirable effort in casting the disarmament charm. Harry was relieved to see that Crabbe could at the very least make the opponent drop their wand to their feet. That was an acceptable level. Even if barely. Professor Phantom instructed both of Malfoy's henchmen to visit extra practice classes to hone the charm, but this time, thankfully, Harry and Ron didn't need to be present for that one. Furthermore, he rewarded the two with points for the level of dedication and presented results. Hermione and Parkinson both showed excellent techniques. Even Neville, abysmal as the help from Malfoy was, managed to knock a wand a meter away, and was rewarded accordingly. Harry never saw the clumsy Gryffindor smile so much in a Dada lesson ever since Lupin came about. After everyone showed their level of preparation, the students were seated at their desks as he began speaking, with a grin on his face. I must say, the level of potential you generally show is making me very optimistic about your future exams. Keep up the excellent work. I believe now we can move to another topic. This time we will be revising the knockback jinx. I believe you won't have any trouble with it, it's a first-year charm. Despite what I said about it before, it is still a part of the program, even if much less important. And it will be present in your OWLs. By the next lesson I will make sure to fetch some creature to spice things up, you have my word. Now, open your books on the page. He suddenly became sour in the face as the sound of opening door was heard around the room. Dolores, what are you doing here? His feelings were shared by an absolute majority of the people present. Nobody wanted Umbridge to be there and interrupt the lesson again. Dolores herself, however, seemed oblivious to the fact. Her crooked smile was off-putting, malicious even. She looked like a very fat predator, happy that her lunch stopped by, for it would be a hustle to go hunting. Danny did not like playing this role. I have received some very interesting information, Mr. Phantom, Dolores said with feigned concern. Danny did not like where this was going. So. It was finally the time, huh? The professor sat at the table, his face now surprisingly amused. I confess. It was my glue, he said, his sincerity going out of the window. Pardon? Dolores blinked. Oh, what are you here for then? I sent an owl to Makusa at the start of the past week. The other day I received a response, containing your dossier. And to be frank, I am appalled by your biography. Danny's expression didn't change. That makes two of us. I'm actually curious myself about what Makusa writes about me after all these years. Are you sure we should be discussing it here, though? I have a lesson to give. The students' interest was piqued more than during the lectures. What was there in the man's biography that made Umbridge appalled? The old lady opened the file she had been carrying. I believe that the students have the right to know who is being in the same room as them. Daniel James Phantom, age 20. Born in the town of Amity Park in a family of muggles, she said with a very familiar venomous undertone, tell me, is it true that you are a direct descendant of John Nightingale? Who? Harry whispered, and his sentiment was shared by many. He was one of the cruelest witch hunters of Salem. And one of the reasons the statute of secrecy was even passed, Danny was suddenly the one to begin explanation, it should be covered in your history of magic course. The people, oblivious to the fact, stared wide-eyed at the professor, who remained composed as ever. "Yes, it is true," he added. "He is my paternal ancestor. But I fail to see how. You were still accepted in Ilvermorny. You had average grades, minimal amount of social interaction. The most audacious thing, however, is that at the age of 14 you went through expulsion. Mr. Phantom, you never passed a single exam, and yet you are teaching here, at our prestigious institution." Danny could hear the murmurs and whispers. Sighing, her rubbed his temples. The requirements for teaching are not stated anywhere. It is up to the headmaster's discretion. A discretion he constantly abuses, Dolores spat. "How can you teach however you like when you haven't even finished your school?" "I can sit a nude exam whenever you want," Danny responded calmly, standing up. "If that's what you need. I doubt you would be able to pass it, Phantom. Considering that your wand has been broken for years." Now when they thought about it, the students never saw him use a wand once. They never even saw one at his side. "I don't need a wand to win a duel." "I beg to differ. But it wasn't broken simply because you were banished, now, was it?" She smiled. "You were expelled on the account of delving into dark magic." Several gasps were heard across the room. "The court ruled me innocent in the end. Everyone just didn't want to admit their mistakes, so nothing was restored. Not my studies, not my wand." "You didn't stop there, however. The following year you were accused of being involved in deaths of 3 muggles." Suddenly, something changed in the air. It became chilly, cold for just a moment, so it wasn't as noticeable, but Harry could swear he saw someone's breath. "If you dare say that I murdered my own family, I will show you how professional I am in my field," Danny said through his teeth. Even Umbridge subconsciously took a step back. "I never said anything of the sort." "But you implied it, didn't you?" "I am free, as you can see. And I do not hide. Because I have nothing to be ashamed of and to be punished for." "Is that all, Dolores?" "I have a lesson to run." It was evident what was really going on. Umbridge wanted to cause a scene. She wanted everyone to see Danny either confirm or deny everything she said. The very fact of such controversy existing was enough for her. A scandal was brewing. Children could talk to their parents and make the impact much bigger than what could be achieved by writing in a prophet. She needed eyewitnesses, the sly toad. Danny could see how someone with a face of heavily drinking grandma could reach so high within a ministry. His calm attitude was only due to how he had prepared himself for a moment this was going to be brought up. "I will talk with Dumbledore. And with the minister. You cannot be allowed to do as you please when you are just an unqualified miscreant. You really want to check my abilities yourself, don't you?" "Is this a threat, Phantom?" "It's an offer." Danny put his head on his palm, grinning like Cheshire Cat. "You were proposed to take my position, surely you can best the person who was booted out of school." "I don't even have a wand, Dolores. Or are you afraid that I will curse you with my dark magic? I have no interest in giving satisfaction to some brute. I am no more satisfied than you are. Again, I am ready to prove my capabilities whenever. And however you would like. And I am not addressing that nonsensical CRP with dark arts. There is a court ruling for that." Umbridge glared at the young professor. "Someone like you must not be allowed to teach. Are you going to repeat the same thing over and over?" "My hearing is excellent, Dolores. And no, Mr. Zabini, the lesson will continue as planned." The dark-skinned boy froze. His words to his friend had only been a whisper, and he was in the other end of the room atop of that. So he had heard and would hear every small exchange done before and which would happen in the future. "This isn't over, Phantom. This was only a minor part of my future report which will inevitably lead to your sacking." "Oh, brother. Do I get my termination payment?" "A what?" Danny deflated. "Your social services have some serious issues. Your jokes will lead you nowhere, Phantom. You still here? He said the last sentence without any attempts at humor, as if obliging her demands. Umbridge didn't wait for long and made her exit. Slowly. Danny kept glaring at the door for a couple of seconds, before turning to the class, pulling the best smile he could offer now, a bit tired, small, obviously faked one. Anyways, the knockback jinx. If this question is about me, Miss Patil, I reserve the right to stay silent. If it wasn't dark magic that got you expelled. It was a project of mine. My knowledge is very specific, and I studied the supernatural extensively. The spectral entities, to be exact. To some it was off-putting and they decided to jump to conclusions. Yes, I was a weird kid. Let's just get back to the topic. That evening, Danny was summoned to the headmaster's office. It was to be expected, honestly. The young man was ready for it, and if he was to be fired, let it be. Umbridge hadn't hesitated to rat him out, it seemed. Opening the doors, Danny went inside, being greeted by the heads of houses, Dumbledore and the Toad herself. I wish I didn't come here like a miscreant student, commented Danny. His eyes fell on McGonagall, whose lips were extremely thin. Coincidentally, it was her who spoke first. You are something worse, you are a deceitful fraud, Mr. Phantom, she snapped. Excuse me? Danny's eyebrows shot up. It appears you neglected to share the information we discussed today even with your colleagues, said Dolores judgmentally. Danny really wanted to punch her, knowing the implications of said decision both for her health and his reputation. It's not like they asked. I even brought my documents that day, said the young professor. This is not a valid excuse at all, Sprout squeaked. After the talk we had about how important your post is, you never once chose to mention the fact that you have never even finished your school. I am capable. I don't hear the students complaining. If I may, Flitwick put in slowly. While I am very disappointed myself in this fact, my students have only positives to say about him. Don't yours say this, too? McGonagall nodded begrudgingly. That is true, admittedly. Danny couldn't help a smile from emerging. Those kids. The opinion of our students is very important, Dumbledore spoke up. Albus, Umbridge said, students need DSPLN. This does not speak of his qualifications. He was expelled. And even before that his grades were acceptable at best. Including the defense. That is quite a speed bump, the old man admitted. What are you suggesting, Dolores? Why, fire him. He can't remain here any longer than needed. You need a replacement, first, Danny pointed out. You are not telling me that you should be the one. Of course I can take this mantle if needed. You are already an inquisitor. This will harm both sides of your activity, the young still professor shrugged. He does have a point, Dumbledore supported him and rubbed the white beard. Why don't we find an alternative solution? I fail to see what that is, Dolores huffed. Danny, however, stepped forward. I told our friend with abysmal fashion sense that I am ready to take the exam or confirm my abilities in any other way. This is not how the educational system works. I'm not asking for a diploma. This is just to calm your nerves, is all. I doubt it will be legit outside of this school. It, most certainly, will not. This whole idea is ludicrous, and I demand, as a High Inquisitor, that you fire this man, Dumbledore. Danny glared at Dolores, before sighing. I really hoped we wouldn't have to resort to this. What in the world do you even mean? Dolores Jane Umbridge, born of a Muggle mother and a wizard father, Danny looked at the ceiling, grinning widely at her surprised expression. The latter being the ministry's own janitor. Grades just as average as mine. You see, Dolores, I have a couple of familiar people in the ministry myself. This summer you have made contact with the head of Azkaban. A meeting, which, strangely enough, did not go into records. Dumbledore's eyes sparkled with curiosity. If you think that this empty accusation will have any effect. He told me what you talked about, too. And if needed, he will tell others. Umbridge froze. Gogol's silent scene fell down upon the entire audience, as the veiled threat known only to the professor and the Inquisitor made the air heavier. What are you talking about? McGonagall asked. Dolores, what about that exam again? Danny kept smiling, deriving the most delicious of vengeances from the toad's pale face. I will contact the experts, she hissed, as if each word she said hurt her. Danny approached Dolores and patted her shoulder. Splendid. I'm glad that we have you on board. Dumbledore's face may not have been showing it, but he now saw the newest teacher from an entirely new, sinister point of view. That man, with barely any effort, now blackmailed the Inquisitor herself. Underneath those smiles and pleasantries was a dangerous, plotting individual, there were no doubts about that. He didn't know how Danny managed to contact the Warden of Azkaban, but the fact itself was off-putting. How many people did this homeless man have in his pocket? Dumbledore thought heavily about who Dannyphantom actually was, too unaware to make a true conclusion. In truth, the situation was much less sinister. A ghostly possession was a universal tool, one of such powers allowed to read the possessed person's memory. So, by calling a favor with some of the ghosts strong enough to overshadow people, Danny got a couple of ministry officials possessed. Following a chain of clues led the young man to the warden. And then the last ghost sent a letter back with the most interesting information. The same information Danny was using now against Umbridge. However, he was bluffing about calling the warden here. Danny's meddling would immediately be revealed, and he would be knee-deep in SHT. Albus, Danny broke the old man out of his thoughts. Do you think this idea will work? He knew that the headmaster's word was now final. Albus nodded and smiled. This is a wonderful proposition. However, Daniel, what you did to us was deplorable, you should know that. I brought the papers, Danny muttered, fine. I get it. Sorry, guys. If I fail the exam, I will pack my things. That is noble of you. That will be all, I think. Danny nodded and happily exited the room. For now his main threat was eliminated and was slowly following him out, her hands shaking in anger. When the doors closed, the heads turned to Dumbledore, as they were now free to discuss the issue between each other. Without extra interruptions. This boy is insane, Sprout muttered. Did he actually just threaten her? She obviously did something nasty to fear him so much, Flitwick added. You are still taking his side, Phileas. I know he is a good boy. But that he is also a sly one, this I cannot deny. We should still stay on guard, everyone, Dumbledore said. With the same resourcefulness he showed against Dolores, he may act against us if Daniel indeed has a hidden, malicious motive. Watch yourself when you are near him, but try not to raise suspicions. Albus, why even try keeping him around if he is that dangerous? McGonagall inquired. The same reason as to why Quirrell was allowed to teach despite his condition. We can find out a lot if we keep him close. Everyone was startled by a sound behind them, Flitwick even jumped. They turned around and saw that a book had fallen from one of the tables. The door was still closed. Sighing, Phileas fixed his glasses, as Dumbledore turned to the one who had been quiet all this time. Severus. Do you have something to say? Albus. He actually asked me to help him with his research. Oh. So you think you can get closer to him by joining? Yes, sir. That will be an excellent way of learning more about his identity. And putting our minds to rest. The one who was the reason behind the fallen book narrowed his invisible eyes and turned to leave, going through the wall outside. Blimey, that's insane, Ron muttered, not touching his roasted potatoes. I'm surprised Phantom is still here. Harry turned towards the staff table, seeing the young professor eat his lunch. From the outset, it didn't look like he was worried at all. This, Coupled with how murderous Umbridge looked, everyone could figure out that Danny was there to stay. How did he pull that off, though? Hermione whispered questioningly. Umbridge can sack any teacher she wants. And look at how angry she is. She is gonna begin croaking any time now, Ron cackled. Then she failed to fire him, concluded Harry. Do you think it is something Dumbledore said? Or maybe it was Phantom himself, mumbled Hermione. You can't be serious, Hermione, the raven-haired teen said, look at him. As he said it, Danny cheerfully emptied a goblet with pumpkin juice and wiped his mouth. Harry, we all know something is off about him. Come on, you don't believe those rumors about him are true, right? Harry asked. About his crimes? After being wrong about our teachers 3 times out of 4, I'm cautious about making claims. Something doesn't add up though. What do you mean? His grades weren't better than yours. He was expelled. And yet, you see how Phantom teaches. What was he doing during the last 5 years to be an expert like this? Harry's expression suddenly gained clarity. Ghosts. What? It's obvious, isn't it? How they talk about him, why Peeves is afraid and why he knows so much about them. I don't get how that makes him so good. Honestly, Ron, Hermione rolled her eyes, he was involved in some dangerous activities. That's probably what made him strong. Nothing bad about it, though, said Harry. Yes, but how come nobody knows about him then? Shouldn't a man who has done so much be famous not only with ghosts? Maybe he just doesn't like publicity. We should investigate. Hermione, we have homework, Ron deadpanned. You could have done it beforehand, mumbled Hermione inside. Yes, we should concentrate on studying for now. We would expect nothing else from you, Prefect, said one George Weasley, emerging behind them alongside his inseparable brother. Always hard at work to keep us all safe and her mind filled, added Fred. Don't be so HRD on the teach. He is neat. AMSTR we all can learn from, said George dramatically, putting a hand over his heart. Are you still trying to get him? Ron asked. That we do, we aren't going to surrender that easily. Problem is, he is one step ahead. From that box he confiscated he knows all the tricks we have, so we need to come up with new ones. That's quite exciting, isn't it, brother? Indeed it is. We are actually suspecting that he got Peeves involved. What makes you say this? Phantom knows every nook and cranny we use. Aside from that little piece of paper Harry has, the only way he can learn about them is to talk with ghosts. But why Peeves? I don't exactly think Nick or Baron would encourage this. Fair point. Have you noticed anything strange? Hermione. What? I'm trying to understand who we are dealing with. Nothing, really, answered Fred, aside from the fact that he is as sneaky as a gnome. As a ghost more like, Ron mumbled, stabbing a small potato with a fork. He really likes playing the part. Harry thought about it harder. From how Umbridge presented it, and what Danny was like, the teen could only guess that it was natural for the man to be this way. Yes, he was often polite, cheerful and friendly, but he probably wasn't always like this. He didn't look strong, he was a descendant of a mass murderer of wizard folk. It could be understood that he was probably bullied in school. Harry realized this because he and Dudley Dursley lived under the same roof. Before he got his wand and could bluff, his living arrangements were subpar. So, Danny probably had to be sneaky to avoid unwanted attention. And it probably was rubbing off on him even now. The thought made him sad for a moment, but after seeing him act so cheerful, it made him believe that the man was all right now. More or less. Speaking of whom, the topic of the kids' conversation soon got up and set out of the great hall. His mind was in fact busy processing not the upcoming lesson, but the words he had heard when spying on his colleagues and his boss. To be frank, he was pissed at how distrustful most of them were. It wasn't anything new, they already were keeping him in the dark during the summer. But it wasn't just some small secret, was it? They now suspected him to be on Voldemort's side. Him, a Muggle-born wizard, for crying out loud. That double-faced, spectacle-wearing BSTRD in charge of school was toying with him. He thought that Danny would just sit around and let them spy on him. Phantom had prevented a scandal with a tiny exchange and the man just put a label of his own on him. The young professor sighed and leaned against a wall. "Shouldn't have hired me in the first place," he whispered angrily. And if someone could see him, the ominous green, deathly glow would be seen emanating from his eyes. Suddenly he was at fault for everything. Again. Was he really that scary? Was what he did unintentionally frightening? Danny protected not only himself, but potentially the school by having the Inquisitor in his pocket. It led him to make a simple decision. Shall someone from the actual staff get sacked, he won't raise a DMN finger to stop a toad from having a fight with a viper. He was consumed by a well-conceived anger, and it killed even his nascent longing to assist the collective. His ghostly part had its say, and no matter how kind he could try to appear, the grudge-bearing nature of specters prevented him from forgiving things on the next day. Perhaps it was selfish, self-centered. They had their concerns. Dumbledore was worried about the Dark Lord, and Danny was a spammer in everyone's works. A secretive, unknown spammer that was also, apparently, dangerous with his level of knowledge. If they knew what the man was actually capable of, it would not alleviate any concerns. It would only increase them. It was also his fault to some extent, because it was Danny who kept those secrets. A very reasonable fear, it was. But, again, just fire him if you are so paranoid, then. Not that Danny wanted it, but that factor was still annoying. What was even more vexing, is that the young professor actually needed Snape's help. The young man knew that Severus was not going to come to him immediately, to avoid suspicion. Give him a week or so. But Danny did not intend to wait until some other incident occurred. Better milk that cow for all it was worth. Next time they met, Danny was going to ask him directly once again. "Professor?" Danny blinked and turned towards the source of the voice. There, a fourth-year blonde girl was standing, wearing carton spectacles with red and blue lenses. An odd sight all round. "Love good, was it? Is there something you need?" "Our class is soon," she said dreamily as always. "Shouldn't you go there before it starts?" "I was intending to," Danny grumbled softly. "And what are you doing here?" "I heard there is a crumplehorn snorkack nearby. I doubt it can get on school grounds." "I know, but as I was going through the corridor anyways, I thought I could still check." "Are you sure they weren't messing with you on purpose?" asked Danny with concern. "I'm not sure," Luna mumbled. "You sound like you have seen Snorkack before." The professor smirked. "As a matter of fact, I have. It's not from Sweden, however. And they can become invisible, the buggers." The girl's eyes widened. "You have actually met them." "And I even caught a couple, believe it or not. But I always released dangerous things back to their habitats." "Snorkacks aren't dangerous," Luna argued seriously. "They eat truffles and insects. They like coming where they don't belong. And when scared, they can react violently. That horn of theirs is not for show, I'm telling you." Danny looked at his wristwatch. "Yikes, we are being late. I think we should hurry." Danny neglected to mention the part that Snorkacks did not belong not only to Sweden, but to this whole plane of existence. The world of the dead had a lot of bizarre inhabitants. They in particular were quite a bother, since they could sense the rifts between dimensions and just loved to cross over, much to the dismay of the one who had tasked himself with keeping such creatures inside their own place. Not just for the safety of others, but for their own, too. Wizarding kind was far from accepting, he had come to learn. They didn't always appreciate it, they resisted, but Danny was sure that he was doing the right thing. Normal poltergeists and incorporeal spirits were a common thing in England, so Danny wasn't concerned about them. In France, he had heard, the treatment was harsher. He would have to visit when he was done with his project. Being able to carve the path himself was making his job much easier. He really needed to talk with Severus afterwards. And he found the potions mstr quite soon, during lunch, when he was eating in a solitude of his little dungeon. Danny entered the classroom without knocking, getting himself an immediate scowl. Despite his grievance, the young professor smiled. "I'm always surprised to see you indulge in humanly desires," he commented. Snape kept glaring at his visitor. "What do you need, Phantom?" "Straight to the point, huh? Well, I was wondering if you have reconsidered my offer. Remember that one?" Snape's look softened, but it still was a glare. "What has brought this up all of a sudden?" he asked. "Well, now that umbrage is off my back, I am more than happy to go on with my work. So, what do you say?" Severus was not dumb. At first he suspected that Danny knew something. A perk of always being gloomy is that at situations like this his face did not change, no matter what he thought. But how could Danny learn that? All heads of houses were discreet and would not just blather at all. Could he eavesdrop on someone's conversation? That was certainly possible. Very well, Severus decided. He would take the bait. But not immediately. "You are still on probation, Phantom. I wouldn't rely on your blackmail to last." "Maybe," Danny shrugged. "Oh, what am I saying, she will find out that I'm bluffing eventually." He was letting Snape in on the plan to lure him into a false sense of security. Bluffing? Well, Danny rubbed the back of his neck. "I got her, but the warden never talked to me, actually. And he certainly won't testify as I said he would. I am hoping I pass the examination before she finds out so that she has less arguments to sack me by that time. She has already written to the minister, no doubt. Phantom, you are walking on an awfully thin ice. I will never get tired of telling you, I've got it covered. How did you even get blackmail if the warden never even saw you?" Danny hummed. "I have some acquaintances who have ways of extracting information. Legally, of course. I honor the book of law. Is this along the lines of, I'm permitted to do it because nobody says otherwise? I'm glad we understand each other so well, Severus." Danny lightly clapped. "So what do you say?" Snape tapped on the table. "First I have to look at what you have already done." "I keep a journal," Danny grinned. "I'll fetch it after the classes are over." And the professor kept his promise. He had also checked if the information in it did not compromise his identity in any way. With how professional Danny tried to be, there were only necessary details. A couple of things could reveal the truth if you derailed from the original meanings and terms. In the evening Severus received a small notebook in the red leather cover, now having to spend the rest of it reading what his lesser-liked colleague had scribbled over the years. Luckily Severus was a hard-working man, he didn't have anything to check, because it had all been dealt with by then. Sitting in his office, under the light of a lit lamp, Severus first opened a random page just to understand what he was dealing with. At the top, there was a special line for writing down dates. 12 April. Found a new supplier yesterday. For the time being the ectoplasm will be in abundance. This is the attempt number 123. Bezoar has shown to possess a volatile reaction when mixed in with ectoplasm. Its decomposition and latter mixing with sulfur indicates the acidity of the liquid when in contact with nitrogen in particular, abundant in each bezoar. Tried to see if there is any way to negate the effect before I try anything else. I have resorted to the alkali in my disposal. Sodium hydroxide, Li, potassium hydroxide were tried alongside lime water. Only NaOH has shown potency. Decomposition was halted for the time of reaction. The experiments in that direction will have to be stopped for the time being. I don't see the potential of going there now. Snape hummed in thought. The boy had an interesting approach to potions. It was like Muggle chemistry more than anything. It is them who always looked at the components of periodic table. Snape himself was no stranger to the thing. Even if it was an uncharted territory for the potions MSTR. They always judged ingredients for their magical merits, and tried to bring out said merits. Those who walked the borderline were alchemists. It was very difficult, because it required knowledge of both aspects. Danny was somewhat amateur from what he could see, but Phantom was not on the level of Longbottom, that's for sure. Snape decided to look at the very start of the journal. 21 May. So, I bought a journal. Not sure how I should start this thing. My parents' work is all gone, so I am planning on putting down my own research down to, maybe compensate it. Somehow. It will be hard, I'll need decades to replace everything they wrote. Stupid me, I should have taken at least a couple of tubes with blueprints. I think a good start to that will be retracing Mom and Dad's, and Vlad's footsteps. It will be difficult, I'm aware. But if I succeed, I get free ectoplasm for my future plans and experiments, as well as much needed contacts. That's the best plan for the future I've got. It took them 5 years to create a prototype, so I guess it will take quite a while for me as well. This part confused Severus. Phantom's parents were muggles, he did not deny that. What in the world were they researching that involved ectoplasm? It was a material found only among ghosts, and those were kept in check by the ministry. In hopes for an answer, Snape looked through the yellowish pages, but right from the next one, there were only research notes up until the very end. Phantom's commitment was undeniable, he had been at work for 2 years by then. This plan of his, however, was not his only focus. Occasionally Danny had been distracted by side projects, some of which baffled the professor with their bizarre nature. Why would a research journal be riddled with notes about a phantom thermos or, heaven forbid, boomerang? That's got to be a joke. Otherwise, Snape could only reason that the boy had an inflated ego. And was very unimaginative with names. Severus was obviously not getting much vital information from that little red book. Danny wouldn't have given it if the journal was not safe. But some interesting words did occasionally come up. There were other letters written over them to make the words impossible to decipher. But he got a basic understanding of what the boy had been doing so far. Danny had narrowed the search over the years, and he was still following the basic procedures of coming up with new potions. A greater question was whether or not he should actually assist the young man in creating something. Snape didn't read everything, and he certainly took notice of a couple of ripped-out pages. Danny certainly had things to hide. But there were also no indications that whatever the young man was doing posed danger to anyone. Snape ultimately decided that he would make an actual input. Lest the boy blew something up. Having made up his mind, Severus met with Danny the following morning at the nexus of all life in the school. Having taken a seat at the staff table, Snape began stating his condition for assistance. The experiments were to be conducted in a safe environment, which meant relocating the equipment to the dungeons, closer to the dwelling of the Greasy Bat. Snape chose to neglect the jabs at his expense. If ignored, he might just stop this. Hopefully. Danny was obviously perplexed at the idea, and didn't like leaving his toys to be fiddled with by a person he secretly distrusted, but eventually conceded. Danny's own inventions were left where they were, however. Snape, however, made it clear that their first shared experiment couldn't take place earlier than the weekend. Danny was fine with that, he too had a job, as well as certain preparations for the exam. Speaking of which, neither of the two knew just how the rumor of him being scrutinized got out, but that's what happened. The students themselves were now aware that the one preparing them also needed to go through the same thing. It was, to some extent, a growing sense of kinship. Some students liked him more because of that, of how he needed to go through the same thing they did here and then. Hardly everyone reached such thought, but those who did, had some increased sympathies for the young teacher. It was also a test of his teaching methods. If he himself passed, it would mean his methods too worked. Umbridge didn't wait long to contact the ministry and arrange everything. Apparently, the High Inquisitor had a lot of spare time. However, some things just didn't bode well. This Friday? McGonagall asked, hardly hiding her surprise amidst another staff meeting. These were becoming too much of a hurdle for her liking. Indeed, Minerva, the Inquisitor smiled. Better resolve this matter as quickly as possible, before the problem properly takes roots. Her gaze turned towards Danny, who so far had been leaning against the wall with crossed hands. I see no problem. What exactly do you plan, Dolores? He asked. Both theoretical and practical parts. He doesn't have a wand, Flitwick argued. I don't think it is possible to. I am aware, Phileas, Dolores grumbled. That's why we will keep it simple. That was my idea. Danny raised his hand proudly, making Dolores's expression even sourer. Phantom will be tested by one of our best aurors. If he doesn't lose in a duel, we will consider that part acceptable. Are you sure this will be? I don't see any other option, shrugged the young man. Thank you for your assistance, Dolores. This wouldn't be possible without you. Her face was slowly becoming red from seething anger. She didn't say anything as she stormed out. Am I the only one seeing patterns for each of our talks? Danny asked. During the next days, people didn't see Phantom do anything to prepare for the exam on Friday. Some were naturally concerned. Some were skeptic and some were frustrated with his irresponsibility. In truth, Danny did practice and studied theory for quite some time, to brush up his memory. After all, it would do him good even afterwards. However, he did so in a very secluded place, the Forbidden Forest. There he could be sure that nobody interrupted him. And nobody saw him perform the best tricks. In all honesty, he would prefer to use his other form during the exam, but that would entail too many questions and legal processes. At this thought, Danny huffed, as between his fingers jumped a tiny green spark. He flicked his hand, and a burst of green light was launched forward with a loud wheezing noise. It flew a distance of 20 feet and hit the first tree in its way, blowing it up to embers and splinters with yet another thunderous sound. The young man winced, turning intangible in the face of the projectiles. When did it get so strong? He asked himself quietly, picking up a piece of scorched wood lying at his legs. It was true that he hadn't fought anyone for quite some time, hence his obliviousness to the level of his own power. Curious, Danny continued, concentrating the energy more carefully and then swiping his palm horizontally. A crescent of green light flew forward and hit another tree, this time only cutting it like no lumberjack ever could. As it fell, Danny examined his hand. Yes, he was just a bit rusty, he could work on that. After all, he wasn't letting the fate of the first tree to befall on the unlucky auror. And to be honest, the second trunk wasn't doing much better. His exercise was cut short when he heard a distant sound of many hard objects hitting the ground. It was almost as if there was a herd of some ungulates. And from the increasing loudness, Danny knew that whoever was making those sounds was coming closer. He prepared himself for what was going to happen. Soon, it turned out that the noise was in fact made by a herd of centaurs. All armed with bows and looking very angry. Oh, wonderful, Danny muttered, slowly raising his hands. Look, guys, I don't want any troubles. You have a lot of nerve coming here. One of them said and stepped forward, a creature with doomed future. The young man pouted. Hey, it is not me who is doomed. It's the rest of world that is screwed. Didn't the prophecy change over the years? You appear to be aware of it, the centaur huffed. And so do you. Doesn't surprise me, you guys are all seers. In case the stars did not tell you this, Clockwork and I are in cahoots. You know him, right? We do not accept his authority, hybrid. He is the time MSTR, pal, Danny sighed. You don't get to choose. Are we done? Leave immediately. We won't stand for your presence. But you tolerate some pretty indecent creatures. You are the filthiest of all, a human who lingers even after his death. Danny clicked his tongue. You are awfully foul-mouthed in front of a walking doomsday clock. Leave. At once, the main centaur warned, and Danny could hear the strings of bows being pulled. The young man's eyes turned neon green. I will. When I am done. We can still resolve our differences peacefully. Am I disrupting your sleep or something? It is quite late. If you would. Danny heard a string being released. Instantly he raised his hand and caught an arrow flying into his temple. I get it, in your society of pricks I am ostracized. Fine, I'll find another place to practice. If you show up in our forest. You will what? The glow in Danny's eyes was not ceasing. Tickle me with these things. He snapped the arrow and tossed the pieces away. Don't make threats you can't fulfill, pal. I'm leaving because my boss will scold me if I harmed anyone in this wonderful national reserve. Who are you talking about? Danny sighed, and after the next blink, the glow was gone. The stars are quite picky about the knowledge they give you, aren't they? Dumbledore is the boss. I am a teacher. I thought they are allowed to come here. But not to destroy everything around it, impudent child. Finally. Danny exclaimed. Wasn't so hard to give me an explanation, was it? His snark was not appreciated by the centaurs, but there was admittedly little they could do. Danny was usually very considerate of half-breeds, being one himself. He respected them, he pitied werewolves. However, it didn't excuse the arrogant behavior of the half-horses in front of him. It largely explained why the wizards were hesitant to raise their status. The former were bigots, sure, but the tiniest bits of sympathy were often squished beneath their hooves. I guess I will just go and find some other place, Danny grumbled. Admittedly, I am taking out some frustrations here. We are not interested in your reasons. Get lost. Danny gave him a small glare, before turning around to leave. He was half tempted to give them a scare out of spite, and a little devilish Danny on his shoulder was whispering to kick the BSTRD, but he decided to let it slide. He was, after all, a person that chose to avoid conflict. Granted, he failed most of the times. He and his mouth that never shut up. And yet, he regretted absolutely nothing. A bit sore about the encounter, Danny returned to the castle grounds, muttering some unsavory words under his breath. The hours were late, so he didn't meet any students on his way. However, the ones unbothered by the need to rest were ghosts. Fat Friar emerged from around the corner, having triggered Danny's ghost sense. Oh, Daniel. Fancy meeting you here, why the long face? Hello, Friar, Danny waved. Just had a run-in with centaurs. The pricks chased me away. I understand that their attitudes are not the most approachable. I know you will try to give it a positive spin. Somehow. But don't bother, I've made up my mind. Very well, if you don't mind me asking, what were you doing there? Training. I can't just fire blasts in the hall. Yes, that would be unwise, Friar muttered thoughtfully. Do you know any place for me to practice? Not sure that wait. I think I know of a place. You do? Danny brightened up. Indeed. Follow me, you can fly while like this, right? As a human. I am floating right now, Danny smirked, demonstratively tapping on the ground without making a sound. Lead the way, just don't be too quick. I can't fly fast while like this. Friar gave a small laugh and nodded. The ghost and the half-human made their way through the walls and the ceilings of the castle, careful not to get spotted. They stopped in an empty corridor. Danny dropped invisibility and started looking around curiously. Are you suggesting that I train here? Danny rubbed his temple. Heavens, no. But Hogwarts is a place of many secrets. Here we can find another one of those. I remember hiding some things here. Back when I was alive. Danny raised an eyebrow. At his stare, the friar began looking around. And if he was still alive, he would have blushed. I chose to hide food there. If I brought it to the dorm, they would have laughed at me. Danny chuckled and shook his head. Hey, we all have our passions. So, what's with the secret and why haven't I heard anything about it? Not every professor knows about it. And for me to tell about it, you have to ask first. And I, admittedly, can't tell this to everyone, Dumbledore asked us not to. But I know who you are, Daniel. You are a hero. I wouldn't be so extreme. It's not extreme. I really admire you, boy. For your age you have faced so many challenges and saved us all from certain doom. I think I owe you at least this bit of information for all you did. Danny couldn't resist a smile. Thank you, Friar. But you don't owe me anything. About the room of requirements. It always appears at the time of your need in this very corridor. For instance, I told you that I stored my lunch there. Imagine that you need a place to store your things. Then, with that thought, pace 3 times, back and forward, right there. Danny felt a bit dumb for following the silly instructions. But what did he have to lose? The young professor walked from one spot to another 3 times, just as he was told, and then something stopped him. There, in the wall, appeared a door that definitely hadn't been there before. Wide-eyed, Danny turned to Friar. I could just phase inside. No, child. You could not. This wall appears hollow if you just do this. But, if you go through the door, the effect will be quite different. Come, open it. Danny approached it and put his hand on the handle. Swinging the door open, he remained at his spot, gobsmacked at what he saw. The insides of the room, right from the outset, were enormous. The ceiling was nowhere to be seen, and the other end of the room could not be found either. But that was largely due to the huge mountains of junk. There were tons of them. Wardrobes, scrolls, globes. All possible pieces of furniture could be found if you looked carefully. It truly was a storage place. Danny entered the room, guided by his curious mind. Friar followed close second, reminding the young man to close the door. This is incredible. Danny said breathlessly. Still not as littered as my dad's garage, but still. It truly is, right? You can exit and repeat the process, imagining a place fit for you to train. That's great. Danny suddenly perked up. What is it? The ghost asked. I think I'm sensing something. You said that no ghost could get here. Yes, the door doesn't appear near the ghosts. I figured it would work for you and turned out to be right. Then why am I picking up a signature? The question Danny asked was mostly for himself. He set off in seemingly random direction. Now. It was Friar who had to keep up with his companion. This trip lasted for 10 whole minutes of going in a straight line through the pillars of junk. Soon, Friar caught up with Danny, who was holding a strange object in his right hand. A discolored, old tiara. Daniel, what is this about? Friar asked worriedly. That's what I want to find out, Danny muttered, his free palm igniting with green light. This thing is obviously ancient. And it is the source of some strange ecto-energy. Something is written here, a bit hard to make out, but I think I get it. Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. Friar gasped, this is Ravenclaw's motto. And it is also a diadem, it can't be. What is it? Asked Danny. It is the diadem of Ravenclaw. It belonged to her when she was alive, and was lost, and yet it is here. Friar rambled. Oh, this is so exciting. Friar, Danny interrupted seriously. You are forgetting that this thing reeks. And I don't like this one bit. But, what do you reckon is it? The young professor's face turned grim. The substance of the dead stuck to an inanimate object. Corrupted substance, might I add. I am actually holding a Horcrux. Ancients, what a find, he muttered. I am not sure I follow. And you shouldn't. Luckily, Danny smirked. I have just the way of handling these. Un momento. His hand turned intangible. He wrapped it around the diadem, actually being able to grab something, his face contorting in displeasure. It was like he was touching pieces of wet food in a kitchen sink. Not without effort, but Danny ripped out an object of sorts. His palm was covered in black, thick smoke. Danny balled a fist, engulfed in green light of his own and squashed it. Like a tomato it popped, dissolving in the air. Well, I sure did something. At this moment, the boy who lived and the man who died from the boy who lived screamed in agony. Daniel! What did you do? A piece of soul bound to an inanimate object is basically possessing it. I have an experience of exorcising ghosts by enforcing my own presence. Besides, I had a run-in with Herpo the Foul at some point. I don't know to whom this Horcrux belonged. Herpo? Friar scratched his temple, he has been dead for millennia. Now he is, Danny smirked. I think we should tell Dumbledore, Friar said carefully, seeing the young man's expression sour. Daniel. I don't know what it was, but it is a diadem of Ravenclaw. A find of a century. You are right, Danny sighed. We'll bring it to him. Can we omit the Horcrux part? I am not sure, this is very concerning. I am sure Dumbledore will know what to do. He leaves an impression of someone who knows everything, Danny muttered bitterly. On one hand, I'm happy to dump this stuff on him. I don't have the time to solve another case of a wannabe leech. On the other, he sighed and looked at the ghost. Dumbledore doesn't trust me, Friar. How can I trust him? What brought this up? The spectre asked, sounding surprised. I overheard him talking. The guy thinks I'm a Death Eater, no doubt. Don't be like this, Daniel. It doesn't mean he is going to ignore a matter such as this. But won't that make me appear strange? I just waltzed in and slaughtered a piece of someone's corrupted soul. Again, Friar. He is already suspecting me. This, he raised the diadem, won't help my reputation. I guess you are correct, Friar mumbled. I'll bring it eventually. Just not now. After I am fired, maybe, Danny said with a smirk. This obviously means that we don't disclose what happened here to anyone yet. Can you promise me that? Daniel. You know that I don't approve of all these secrets between you all. I could try speaking to Dumbledore on your behalf. I appreciate it, Friar, but no. He will ask too many questions to you then. Besides, it will make me look and feel bad if I send you instead. Let's leave it at that. If you say so, Friar mumbled. You can't leave it lying around here, though. Surely. I'll hide it in another place. Maybe I could sell it. Daniel. What? I need money. Danny then smiled. I'm just kidding, pal. I get it, the thing is important. As he was going to the exit, twirling the diadem around his finger, Danny got an idea to whom this Horcrux belonged. Located in Wiltshire, England, the manor of a rich wizarding family was tucked away from any muggle. It was the residence of Malfoy House. And it also was the place that the Dark Lord had taken residence in for the time being. For his plans to come into fruition, he needed discretion, so he couldn't remain there for long. But, by the force of chance, it was in that manor where the agonizing scream was heard in the middle of the night. Lucius Malfoy, the patriarch of the house, usually reserved and aristocratic, was unkempt and shaky, because he had no clue what caused such reaction from their lord. And he prayed that it wasn't because of him. He went to check on him, as did every Death Eater in the building. However, Voldemort did not grant anyone audience until an hour later. And it just so happened that the owner of the house was to face the Dark Lord's reaction. In the dining room he sat, his skin pale as a paper sheet, his head not having a single hair or a nose for that matter. His scarlet eyes bore into the host, who was still dressed in his nightwear. Voldemort himself, it appeared, did not sleep at all, seeing him dressed in his black robes as always. Lucius saw the man's pet a gigantic snake, slither past his legs. "Lucius," Voldemort greeted. "My lord," Lucius bowed. "What?" "That's what I wish to know," the Dark Lord said with cold collectedness. "Something precious was stolen from me today, Lucius." Malfoy looked at him in shock. "Nobody entered or exited this place, we would have known, I specifically put the people on guard." "No, you are not to blame here, Lucius. There is nothing you could have done to stop this." However, the sinister undertones in Voldemort's voice became more noticeable as he rose from his seat at the head of the table. "I wish to know something. I hope you will indulge me. I will try to answer. Has anyone entered the Lestrange vault?" "No, nobody entered there for a while." "It will not hurt to check," the statement sounded like an order. "Coincidences like this are impossible." "Milord, if I may ask." "No, you may not," Voldemort hissed. "I understand what you wish to know as is. Check there, Lucius." "It shall be done," Lucius bowed again. "If you would still humor me," continued Voldemort, "you told me about that new teacher in Hogwarts. That insolent boy?" "Yes," Draco described him perfectly. "And he is also a Muggleborn of all things, my lord. Are you suggesting that he is behind it?" "I have the reasons to suspect him. One of my prized possessions was right in front of Dumbledore's eyes for years, and not even 1 month in, it gets destroyed. The only thing that changed is the professor that teaches defense. And if he remained in his post despite what fools at the ministry say, there is something that old man is plotting. We must understand what it is before we execute our plan. You are free to leave now." Friday finally came about, and with it the dreaded inspection. Danny's morning began with reading the notes in one of the books he had. He did so without looking up as he went down to breakfast, earning himself confused and even amused glances. With how nobody had seen him prepare before, he looked like a lazy student trying to piece together at least some tidbits of information. Still, he swiftly avoided all the obstacles on his way to the Great Hall, be it walls, kids, or fellow professors. He came by and went, having eaten his breakfast very quickly, his ice-blue eyes still glued to the book. He was only interrupted once, when Dolores arrived to ruin his perfect plan of action. "Mr. Phantom. For once I am observing your diligence." Danny did not respond and chewed on his toast, not looking up. "Mr. Phantom. Another bite. I am talking to you." "Good for you," Danny mumbled. "Are you even listening?" "Nope. The inspectors are waiting in the courtyard. Do come there if you don't wish to get tossed out of this school this instant." Danny waved her off and went back to his book, looking as angry as ever when the two were in close proximity. If only the brat didn't have the blackmail. Danny did glance at her leaving form, taking a sip of coffee and then going back to reading. He stopped reading near the end, putting away the book upon realizing that learning this way was not effective in the slightest. The letters just passed him by without leaving any knowledge behind. Still, he had been studying beforehand, so he obviously was not going in unprepared. Sighing, Danny stood up and went to the courtyard, the many eyes of student body watching him leave, him looking as upbeat as ever. On his way to the yard Danny turned invisible. He wanted to examine the newcomers before standing before them, because he knew that they were going to do the same. He, however, would have a larger amount of time to see for himself. As he went, he was fully submerged in his thoughts about the last time he faced an exam of such vitality. After getting kicked out of magical school at the age of 14, Danny had no choice but to enroll in a normal one. But as luck would have it, that year there was a career aptitude test, an important exam that would largely affect his future job, as the name suggested. Problem was, he had spent the previous 4 years casting spells and feeding nifflers. Not solving equations and learning history. And that inaptitude that threatened to ruin his life in Muggle world, too, was the precipice of a heart-wrenching story of how a single cheat can ruin someone's life. All worked out in the end, and it involved time travel, too. Didn't save his family at a later date, but there was a valuable lesson to be learned. It left him with a notion of how sincere one should be. That lies brought only suffering. The thought of how poorly he followed said ideas now was disheartening. In any case, Danny soon got to his goal. Umbridge Danny promptly ignored. His interest was on 2 other people that accompanied her near the main fountain. One of them was an elderly, short and stern-looking lady. The other caught Danny's interest much easier, maybe due to how he looked. That man had an imposing presence, looking like some noir detective. He even had a trench coat. Finally, having finished his examination, Danny dropped invisibility behind them. "Good morning." The professor called, startling everyone as always. "I'll never get tired of this." "What in the world do you think you are doing, young man?" the old lady asked. "Saying hello. Pardon my lack of courtesy. You are the inspectors who are checking my competence, are you not?" The lady blinked, whilst the man remained stoic. Umbridge was the one to speak next. "This is the insufferable man I was talking to you about, Griselda, Dawlish. He looks like a child." "I am 20, lady," Danny huffed and crossed his hands. "Guess my face hasn't made it to the front page of Prophet yet. So, can we begin? I had to cancel my classes today." "I will be happy to perform his duties," Umbridge put in, "till the end of the year, I sincerely hope." Danny gasped. "Dolores, I appreciate your willingness to help," he said as insincerely as possible. "I can hardly find a person as diligent as you." He then turned to the 2 visitors. "Sorry for the scene. But seriously, the sooner we get this out of the way, the better, don't you agree?" "Hey, Columbo, are you the one fighting me? Are you talking to me?" asked Dawlish with a raised eyebrow. "Yeah, because you look, never mind. It's nothing derogatory, I promise. Yes, we are going to duel after you are done with written test. Do you have a classroom we could use?" Griselda asked, obviously responsible for the test part. "Yeah, actually," Danny put in. "There is one the headmaster provided, just close by. Follow me." Dawlish, now dubbed Columbo, stayed near the fountain. Umbridge went to supervise the children education. Danny may not have shown it, but he was also concerned. He may have mocked her, but she had shown to be less than adequate when it came to her views and attitude. Not to mention that her methods differed so much from his that the lesson was as good as wasted. That was the best-case scenario. Danny shook his head and pushed away that thought. He would deal with this later, now his attention needed to be solely on the test. As he sat in an empty classroom at the first row, Griselda took something out of her handbag. She put a piece of parchment right in front of the young man, face down. "Never thought I would experience that again," Danny mumbled, seeing Griselda take out a quill. "From what I know, you never did go through newts. Here, this is an anti-cheating quill. Don't even think of trying to be sneaky." "Never had intention to," smirked Danny. "I had a good lesson on cheating during tests, trust me." "I certainly hope so. This test is one of our older ones. You can begin." Danny flipped the parchment over and got down to work. This was his chance to, once and for all, prove his worth. He would not let himself screw up. Confidently, without as much as a waver, he immersed himself in writing the test. The young professor had a couple of hours. The questions before him were not of extreme difficulty. His knowledge of dark matters, despite how ominous that sounded, was handy. Danny scribbled on the parchment, invoking his past experiences to aid him in writing down the answers. Occasionally he looked up at the inspector lady, who was surprisingly attentive for her age. He would expect her to open a book to read instead of keeping constant watch, and yet she was burning a hole through his scalp. His mind occasionally drifted away, to the classroom currently under the occupation of a cardigan-wearing menace. He was really worried about what Umbridge was going to do with the children. It's not like she would cut their throats, but boring them to death was certainly something she was capable of. And the lessons were as good as wasted with her methods. She definitely was not going to pick up the torch and continue his program. They really would need to pick up the pace later. Counting the hours in his head, Danny figured that he would have the time to teach a couple of late lessons if he hurried. By the time the smaller hand of clocks marked the passing of 2 hours, Danny stood up, a smirk on his face, the parchment with answers in hand. "I'm done," he said. "Good," responded Griselda curtly and took the parchment. "I'll check it. In the meantime, go to Dawlish and he will evaluate you." "Sure thing, lady." Danny waved and exited the classroom. Right there he took a deep breath of fresh air, and set out to find Columbo. As he went, the bell rang, and the students were slowly pouring out of their classrooms. They occasionally greeted the professor, if they saw him. The normal shirt and pants in a sea of cloaks gave him away in any local crowd. The rumors, however, traveled fast. From what Danny gathered along the way, someone was at the courtyard when he and others were conversing, and now everyone knew that something visually exciting was going to happen. Not often did you see a professor fight an established aura. Thus, the colorful crowd of students not burdened by any lessons at the moment gathered round, much to the visible displeasure of Dawlish, who was sitting on a bench, waiting for Danny to appear, and, surprisingly, unwillingly conversing with Dumbledore of all people. Of course he would be there, Danny thought without enthusiasm. He was now a phantom menace to the school, after all. Pun absolutely intended. Upon seeing Danny, Dumbledore beamed at his youngest employee. "Ah, Mr. Phantom, you are quite early." "Well, I've had plenty of time to memorize the stuff." "You ready?" asked Dawlish and got up. "You bet, Columbo," Danny smirked. "Where are we gonna do that?" "Right here, Dumbledore will make sure nobody gets caught in the crossfire." The professor looked at the headmaster, receiving a mischievous smile. "I can't stop the kids from sating their curiosity," the old man said. This Danny could understand. "Okay, how do we fight?" "Standard rules." "No, we will not hold back, movement is free. The one who is out of commission loses." Danny's own expression turned devious. "Oh, I have no objections to that." In the meantime, there was one particular trio that joined the audience. The Golden Trio was no less interested than others in how everything was going to turn out. And, luckily, they were among those in the first row. "Gee, wish I brought some snacks," mumbled Ron. "It isn't some Quidditch tournament, Ron," Hermione pointed out. "This is very important. He can get fired if he loses." "I don't know," responded Harry. "Professor doesn't seem to mind himself, right? He also seems pretty confident." "This is gonna be so cool. Wait, what are Fred and George doing?" Hermione looked where Ron had, and her eyes widened in shock. "Oh, no, they won't," she muttered and went towards them. "Well, our stuffy friend is busy now," Ron cackled. "Hey, Harry, who do you reckon gonna win?" "I don't know the other guy." "I know him, that's Dawlish, Dad told me about him. Grades as good as Hermione's, one of the best aurors there are. And on the other, we have our Teach, who doesn't even have a wand." Ron's voice was filling with a sense of dread as he spoke. "That doesn't look fair. It's that Toad's doing, I'm telling you." At this Hermione chose to return, frustration evident on her face. "Can you believe those people? They are actually taking bets. Who is in favor?" "It's Dawlish, that's not what is important." Hermione quickly tried to resume her prefect role. "So the people don't trust Phantom to win?" asked Harry. "He is barely older than us, he didn't even study to the end, he doesn't have a wand." She began counting all the downsides. "He may teach well, but it doesn't mean that he will stand the ground." "Well, I think I'll bet on him." Imagine how high the stakes would be. "Ronald, you cannot encourage." Harry sighed, his mind turning off their bickering. Honestly, sometimes they were like an old married couple. In the meantime, two opponents stood in front of each other. Dumbledore took out his wand and casted a spell. Soon, a dome of bluish light covered the ground around the teacher and the aura. Danny bounced on the ball of his feet like a boxer, his eyes closely watching his rival. As per the rules of the duel, after bowing, they went in the opposite directions, before stopping. Then, another, final signal of Dumbledore, ringing through the deafening excited silence, brought everything into action. "Begin." "Expulso!" bellowed Dawlish. Phantom swiftly avoided the blast of blue light, the shot hitting the barrier. Columbo did not hesitate to continue shooting, while the professor showed an extreme level of agility. He glared at his enemy, who stood still after the barrage. "You are to cast your own spells, Phantom." Danny shrugged and waved his palm. Everyone could feel a drop in temperature, and ball of ice materialized around the man's head. Swinging his hand, Phantom launched the projectiles right at Dawlish, who avoided the first couple, casted Protego to defend against others. Dawlish also noticed that some were aimed at his legs. Seeing the ice spread on the ground after the impact made him realize the goal of his attack. To bind the enemy. Danny did not stop, quickly shortening the distance between them. Stupefy. Dawlish fired, but to his shock, and to that of everyone around, he only hit air. "Where is he?" asked Ron. "Did he just apparate?" "You can't do that in Hogwarts," Hermione mumbled, "and with no wand." Dawlish looked around in search of his enemy. Revelio. Danny felt how his invisibility was ripped out. Oh, how he hated that spell. Dawlish saw him and fired the stunning spell again. Danny was almost hit by a beam of red, but the blast met an obstacle in the form of a green glowing barrier, thin, shimmering under the sun. "Is this enough?" Danny asked, and an observant member of the audience could notice a glimmer of green in his own eyes. "Until out of commission, Phantom. Petrificus totalis." Danny moved away from his own barrier, too thin against a spell this strong. "Attack, Phantom," Dawlish said. Danny realized that Dawlish was not the one getting easily annoyed. He commanded with the same collectedness that was present before. So, a plan was hatched to throw as much as Danny could in a short amount of time. He summoned more ice orbs, and Dawlish visibly prepared for the attack. It was obvious to him that the examinee was going to comply with the demands of the inspector. It wasn't a conventional fight, after all. Dumbledore, for how intrigued he was, observed the fight attentively as well. Daniel must have had something else up his sleeve. After all, he was already demonstrating the magic he had never seen before. This time Danny kept the barrage of icicles, which Dawlish easily deflected once more, but Dumbledore noticed green sparks around the young man's fingers. Once the last ball of ice was crushed, Danny flung his hand once more, and the air was filled with loud, cracking noise and nitrogenous smell. The lightning bolt penetrated the shield and hit the inspector dead on. Dawlish let out a brief scream of pain as the streaks of electricity jumped around his body. Danny took the time to launch more ice, and this time it hit him right in the gut and hurled the man several meters backwards. However, Danny also made no attempt to completely finish the opponent off. Figuratively, of course. "Blimey," Ron muttered, "what even is this magic? Shouldn't he be hurt as well?" "I don't know," mumbled Hermione. "It looks more like a comic book than magic," commented Harry. "What's a comic?" "You are right," Hermione responded. "This is insane. It's not just wandless magic, he never uttered a word to cast them. Ron huffed, what, like a house elf? He doesn't look like one. Come on, Columbo. Phantom called for the inspector, who just got up to his feet. No need beating around the bush. That's all you got? Asked Dawlish. No, that lighting could reduce you to ash if I wanted so. Unrestricted power is a dangerous thing, isn't it? Phantom leaned against a statue near the fountain. I have plenty of tricks left and I am, admittedly, out of practice. At this his eyes began to glow again, as he stood right in front of the aura. Your move. Dawlish glared at the insolent boy professor. Reducto. The red blast flew right at the almost unmoving man, who raised his palm right in front of the projectile. Despite everyone's expectations, he simply grabbed it upon the impact. He redirected the shot, and it hit the barrier around them, but not without flying right near the aura's face. It can blow someone apart, Columbo. I know we agreed not to hold back, but are you sure? How in the hell did you do that? Dawlish raised his voice. I am simply a very proficient teacher and duelist. Never tried this with the killing curse, but I am obviously not eager to test it. Columbo and Dumbledore, the latter of whom was equally surprised at the display, both realized what this trick implied. This was a dangerous territory, because the boy had proven to be capable of something totally unexpected. Dumbledore also paid attention to the glow Phantom emanated. He didn't like that color. The color of death itself. What was that? A dark practice conceived by the deceptively cheerful boy? He was expelled under this very assumption, and the boy really wasn't making it easier to believe in his innocence. Show me all you've got, Phantom, demanded Dawlish, both loyal to his duty and curious himself, while pointing his wand. You said it, not me, said Danny. Suddenly, double beams of green light emerged right from his eyes. Before anyone could even gasp, they flew right at the inspector, who, mistaking it for a certain other spell, instinctively chose to dodge something he deemed impossible to block. The blasts hit the stone column, so unfortunately located within the shield dome, and actually blew it apart. Phantom hissed. Sorry about that, Dumbledore. Worry not. The headmaster called. But please, I advise that you two refrain from anything destructive. What say you, Columbo? Stop calling me that, Dawlish said. Yes, it may actually end in one of us getting killed. Danny wondered if the man's brain began to function only after realizing his opponent was not defenseless. Explain this, Phantom. Oh, that's your basic focus of spectral energies in the air. Condensed and directed with the help of electricity. The same logic with voltage is applied here. To put it simply, I fire ectoplasm. It's up to your imagination, really, he said, and, to prove his point, fired in the air another weak blast from his fingertip. He lied, of course. The young man was firing ectoplasm of his own instead of relying on some obscure floating energies. Smart words made him sound competent, sure of what he was saying. And certainly not lying. Danny's palms were engulfed in emerald smoke, and his appearance was growingly unsettling. Want to see more, Columbo? Phantom asked. Or is this enough for you? We'll see. Stupefy. Danny flicked the blast away, another of his own flying back at the aura. Phantom decided to finish it, as he had already shown something impressive enough, covert enough, and something not needing him to die in a metaphorical sense. Dawlish moved away and continued the onslaught. The annoyed professor was greatly annoying his opponent, for every single shot Danny didn't even try to dodge. His reaction time was outstanding. But the aura couldn't avoid the shots forever. At some point, he was bound to get stuck between the reflected spell and that of the half-ghost. The ectoblast hit him dead on and launched him far, right into the barrier. Before he could get up, Danny, in a shocking show of speed, was right near him, and the ice, the ever-present ice was now holding him captive, cutting off the means of escape. The young man had a grin on his face, as he jumped on one of the less sharp spikes, keeping the balance only God knows how. "It seems I win," he said. Dawlish slowly got up, gripping his wand. Danny pretended not to notice, right until the last moment. Red. With his movements limited, Dawlish couldn't dodge a piece of green sludge. He gagged, his mouth muffled and covered by thick, green goo. And without the mouth, he was basically rendered helpless. "Told ya. Do you concede, Dawlish?" The Auror glared, grunted, but nodded. At that very moment, the ice and the goo vanished into thin air. As the barrier surrounding them vanished, to Danny's ears reached a round of applause. He blinked out of surprise, having paid little attention to the audience their battle had gathered. But nonetheless he smiled and bowed theatrically. Thank you for your appreciation," the professor said. "He didn't even sweat," mumbled Harry, observing multiple reactions from the students around. Of course, they had bet their simple possessions, such as candies or collectible cards. "His magic really is surreal," Hermione responded. "Do you think it is possible to learn it?" "There she goes," Ron rolled his eyes. "Don't we have enough on our plate already? I still have that stupid dream diary to write." "I don't think he will share it," grumbled Harry, remembering the man's reluctance to disclose certain things. Then he heard the whispers nearby. "Did you see his eyes?" one of the girls said to her friend. "I did. And it creeps me out." Whatever the children's initial impression was, it most certainly had changed. For better or worse, that remained to be seen. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 5. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author RusEmp on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.